Chossen won your person fall asleep yesterday night, and suddenly thought that you are. You were scrolling through the morning feed when the lock screen lit up with a photo you hadn't meant to see. It was your person, hair a mess, cheeks flushed, glass half empty on the kitchen counter, eyes glazed over the shimmer of cheap whiskey. The caption was a blur of emojis and a half-written apology that didn't quite land. You stared, heart tightening, because the night before you'd known they were solid, steady, the one who always kept their promises. Yet there they were, the same person you had laughed with over pancakes, now tangled in a haze that felt too big for a simple hangover. Something about the image felt out of place, as if a hidden weight had settled in the room. The first wave that hit you was the distance, an invisible line that suddenly stretched between you, despite the couch they occupied just a few feet away. You could almost hear the room echo with a sigh you hadn't heard before. In the quiet you sensed the gap widening, not because you were physically apart, but because the shared rhythm of your mornings had been broken. The way they used to hum while brewing coffee, the gentle scrape of the spoon against the mug, all seemed muffled now. That dissonance left a hollow ache in the chest, a feeling you could label only as something isn't right, without the need for drama or accusations. You blinked, trying to make sense of why the night had taken this turn. The third party, whoever that was, had spoken in front of you both, a casual remark that felt like a stone tossed into a still pond. It wasn't a scream, just a comment that landed heavy, like a whisper that became a roar in the space between you. The memory of the words flickered in your mind. I never thought you'd. You ask yourself, why would they say that? What hidden truth were they trying to expose? The confusion is not just about the content. It's the feeling that something you thought you understood had been knocked off its pedestal. You can see your person's smile softening, then cracking, as if the truth was pulling the seams of a well-knit sweater. In that fragile pause, a quiet memory surfaces. Back when you both were strangers in a coffee shop, the rain tapping against the window, you sharing an umbrella that was too small for two. You remember the way their eyes lingered on yours a fraction longer, how you both laughed at the absurdity of getting soaked. The scent of fresh espresso still clings to your mind, and the faint hum of the detuned piano in the corner of the shop. Those moments now feel like a separate room, a warm pocket you can visit only when the world outside quiets down enough to let the past whisper. It is in this stillness that the realization begins to ink itself across the canvas of your thoughts. Not as a sudden flash, but as a gradual dawning. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here, one that isn't spoken, but feels as present as the taste of that night's lingering bourbon on your tongue. The subtle trigger is the sound of a glass clinking against the counter, a sound that used to mean celebration, now a reminder of a beating heart that might be trying to sprint away from hurt. You notice how they run a finger along the rim, tracing circles as if trying to smooth out the jagged edges of something unspoken. It's a small gesture, but it tells you more than any words could. Their breath is shallow, and every exhale feels like a sigh, carrying away a fragment of what once was steadier. As the morning light inches across the floor, a gentle regret settles in. You think about all the times you brushed off a comment, thought it harmless, never realizing it would grow into a silent weight someone else could lift and down. You wish you'd asked, "Are you okay?" before anyone else spoke, or even just held their hand when the words landed. The regret isn't about blame. It's about the tender yearning to protect someone who meant so much. You remember a conversation, fleeting as it was, about how easy it is to overlook the quiet battles people fight behind smiles. That thought now loops in your head, a soft echo that refuses to fade. What's happening now feels like a slow unraveling, not an explosion. Your mind begins to map the pieces, the third party's comment, the sudden intoxication, the night's haze, into a pattern you didn't consciously see before. You start to see the tiny cracks, the little white flags that were raised but ignored, the half-hearted, I'm fine after a stressful day. The lingering sigh when they looked at you from across a room. The way they seemed to hold back certain stories. This growing clarity feels like stepping onto a path you've walked before, but now noticing new stones. It isn't scary, just oddly reassuring, as if the universe is quietly pointing out a lesson your heart needed to hear. You find yourself reaching for the phone, thumb hovering over the screen, hesitating between calling or texting. The thought of reaching out feels like stepping onto a delicate bridge, one that could either bring you closer or widen the gap if you place your words on the wrong side. You picture the words, "I saw you, I'm here," rehearsing them in a loop, feeling the weight each syllable carries. The hesitation is not from lack of love, but from a yearning to choose the right kindness, the right timing. In that moment, you realize that waiting isn't always passive. Sometimes it's letting the right moment brew, like a tea that needs just enough steeping before you sip. If this resonates, let it settle in you. Imagine the scene dimming, the noise softening, and you are left with a single, steady heartbeat. That heartbeat is yours, and it's now feeling the subtle tug of something larger than a drunken night, like a quiet invitation to be more attentive, more present, more honest with yourself and the one you care about. It's not a grand proclamation, just a small shift, a tilt in how the air feels around you when you think of them. You notice that the weight you felt earlier is beginning to redistribute, moving from a cold spot of panic to a warm ember of purpose. And then, without a fanfare, a quiet feeling of timing settles in, a soft recognition that perhaps this stumble was not just a random mishap, but a gentle nudge. Not an omen, not a curse, just a moment where the universe, in its subtle way, is handing you a note. Notice, listen, love. It feels like an invitation to be mindful of the whispers that often get drowned out by louder conversations. The scene before you, your person, the empty glass, the soft morning light, begins to take on a new texture. It's not a scene of regret alone, but a canvas waiting for a few more strokes of understanding. Stay with this, because what you're feeling now is the beginning of a subtle transformation. The anxiety that once sat in your chest is now a question mark, waiting for an answer that you'll craft with care. You can sense that the night's turbulence is receding, not because the storm has passed, but because you've started to see the clouds for what they are, temporary, shifting, and ultimately part of a larger sky. The morning after the photo appeared, you found yourself at the kitchen table, with a mug that felt heavier than usual. The steam rose in slow curls, as if the heat itself were trying to coax something out of you. You weren't looking for answers, just the familiar comfort of routine. But the silence in the room felt different, like a room that had been closed for too long, finally being opened a crack. You could sense the distance that had settled like a thin film between you and the empty chair across from you. It wasn't the physical space. It was the way the conversation had stalled in your mind. The unanswered question hanging in the air, the inner confusion that followed was a low hum, a soft static that drowned the easy chatter you were used to having. You wondered, not with accusation, but with a kind of puzzled tenderness, why the night had unraveled so quickly, and why a third voice had become the catalyst. A memory, almost forgotten, slipped in through the crack of that quiet. You recalled the first time you both tried to bake a cake together, flour dusting the countertops, an accidental spill of batter that turned into a laugh. The way their eyes crinkled when they wiped the sugar from their cheek. That moment, simple and sweet, resurfaced like a scent drifting from an old wooden drawer. It reminded you that love often lives in those small, messy interludes, not just in grand gestures. The recollection was gentle, not loud, and it made the present tension feel a little less absolute. Stay with this, because there's a softer undercurrent you might not see at first glance. Suddenly, the kitchen's ticking clock seemed to mark more than minutes. It was counting the small beats of an unspoken conversation you were both holding. A soft red glow from the sunrise tiptoed across the floorboards, And in that light, you caught the flicker of a photo on the fridge, a picture from a beach day when the water had splashed at your ankles, and you both lingered in the moment, not caring about the world beyond the tide. The way you both had stared at the horizon then, eyes reflecting the same shade of hope, now felt like a quiet anchor in the swirling thoughts. Your inner dialogue started to shift. You asked yourself, what part of me missed the signal? The answer nudged you toward a gentle regret that you had taken their occasional "I'm fine" at face value, assuming it meant they were truly okay. You recalled a night when they mentioned feeling a bit off after a long shift, and you replied with a joke, hoping to lighten the mood. In hindsight, the joke might have been a deflection, a way to keep the surface smooth while the deeper currents continued unchecked. The realization arrived not as a thunderclap, but as a soft easing of tension in your chest. You began to see that the third party's comment, though blunt, had actually echoed something that had been lingering beneath the surface. A truth you both had unintentionally set aside. It was as if an old book had been opened to a page you'd missed years ago, and the words now read, "We need to speak before silence grows louder than the words we left unsaid." This clarity didn't feel like a sudden epiphany. It felt more like a gentle tide, pulling at the edges of a shore you thought you knew. Pause now and notice the subtle trigger that follows such a shift. The sound of the kettle whistling, a note that reminds you of their favorite song, humming from the radio. That simple melody, the one you both sang along to in the car on that rainy Sunday, floated through the kitchen and wrapped around the moment. It reminded you of how music once served as a bridge between your moods, turning ordinary afternoons into shared stories. Listening to that tune now felt like a whisper, urging you toward a softer approach. You found yourself drafting a message, not with the urgency of a crisis, but with the patience of someone who has learned that healing often arrives in patient, deliberate strokes. The words formed slowly. I saw the photo, and I felt a knot in my chest. I'm wondering how you're doing, and if there's a way we can sit down and talk about everything that's been happening. Each sentence felt like a small act of care toward yourself and toward them, a recognition that your own heart needed to be soothed even as you reached out. If you've felt this shift, let it settle in you. The feeling is not about trying to fix everything at once, but about allowing yourself the space to breathe, to acknowledge the hurt, and to extend a hand without demanding an immediate response. It's a moment where the what-if becomes less about fear and more about curiosity. What might happen if we simply sat and listened to each other, without the noise of assumptions? What you're now noticing is how easy it is to slip into the role of an observer, watching the emotions roll by, instead of stepping into them. That awareness itself is a quiet kind of healing, an internal realignment that prepares you for whatever conversation lies ahead. The undercurrent of divine timing you sensed earlier now feels less like a cosmic script, and more like the universe nudging you to pause before you rush. It's as if the day itself is giving you permission to take your time, to sit with the ache until it transforms into something softer. Stay with this, because what's emerging isn't a solution yet, but a foundation of empathy you're building for yourself. The way the light shifts across the table now mirrors how your thoughts are shifting, slowly, from a smudge of confusion to a clearer outline. You see the space between you and the empty chair not as a void, but as a place where you can plant a seed of honesty. That seed might take a while to sprout, but the soil is already being turned over by your willingness to listen. A verse from Psalms brushed its way into your mind, not as a sermon but as a quiet reminder. The Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves the crushed spirit, Psalm 34:18. It didn't feel religious in a loud sense, more like a gentle echo that confirmed the feeling that you're not alone in this tender part of the process. The brokenness you sense isn't a sign of failure. It's proof that you're still caring enough to feel. Your thoughts drifted back to the beach photo again, and you imagined the sound of waves, the grit of sand under your feet, the way the horizon seemed endless. In that imagined space, you felt a subtle shift. The fear of confronting a painful moment dissolved into a quiet curiosity about what might happen if you let the conversation unfold naturally. The fear wasn't gone, but it was softened by the knowledge that you're willing to meet it on even terms. And the soft whisper that keeps returning is this: what will it feel like when the words finally make it past the edge of that silence? The curiosity builds, a gentle tension that urges you forward without pressing too hard. You can already sense a small change in your breathing, a slight lengthening of inhales that suggests you're ready to hold space for both your own feelings and theirs. If this resonates, let it settle in you. Notice how the room feels a fraction warmer, how the coffee's aroma seems richer, how the ordinary scene you thought you knew is now layered with a new depth. The hope that lingers isn't a dramatic promise. It's a quiet expectation that a conversation, once held with openness, can become a bridge back to the simple, flower-kissed moments you cherish. What is waiting just beyond this point? A decision, whether to send the note, to call, or simply to breathe a little longer, still hangs in the balance. Yet the shift you're feeling now tells you that the right moment is inching closer, not with a rush, but with a patient pace that respects the subtlety of healing before clarity. The first light sliced through the blinds like a thin ribbon, and you found yourself reaching for the phone without really intending to. There was a draft message waiting in the Notes app, your own words paused halfway, the cursor blinking like a patient heartbeat. You didn't know whether to send it or delete it. The quiet of the kitchen seemed louder than usual, as if the walls were listening for the next breath you'd take. Something about the way the coffee steamed this morning felt heavier, as if each swirl carried a question you hadn't yet found the courage to voice. You sat at the table, the same one where you'd once shared a sunrise over a cheap bakery croissant, and let the memory of that ordinary morning settle around you. Back then, you hadn't spoken the words that hovered between your lips. You simply smiled, let the sun warm your shoulders, and let the moment stretch a little longer than necessary. That unspoken tenderness had always been the undercurrent of your relationship, like a river flowing just beneath the surface, never breaking the banks but always moving. Now, with the photo of them swaying on the countertop still lingering in your mind, that river seemed to have shifted its course. A flicker of inner confusion rose, not as panic, but as a gentle unease. You kept replaying the fragments of last night, the clink of glasses, the half-said jokes, the way their gaze lingered on you for a breath longer than usual before darting away. You wondered why that lingering glance felt like a silent confession, why the space between you filled with something you hadn't named. Was it fear of misreading a moment, or simply the safety of keeping feelings tucked away? The question kept looping around, soft yet insistent, like a song you half remember from a concert you both loved but never sang together. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. In the quiet after the music died, you can hear the echo of a promise that never left your lips. The promise that you'd always be there, not just in the bright moments, but when the world seemed dim. That unspoken promise has been a phantom presence through your days, moving in the background like a soft hum under a favorite melody. It's the reason you find yourself reaching for the phone now, caught between the safety of silence and the pull of something more, something that has been there all along, waiting for a chance to be spoken. You remembered a night at the small park, the one where the city lights turned the pond into a galaxy of reflections. You and they had sat in near silence, watching the water ripple, each of you holding a half-finished thought. You both stared up at the sky, trying to read the constellations, but the real constellations were the ones forming between you. The air was cool, the cicadas thrummed a steady rhythm, and even without words, you felt a current moving, an unvoiced acknowledgement that something deeper was building. You never mentioned it. You simply let the night swallow the feeling, believing it would settle into the ordinary. When the morning arrived, that night's unspoken current resurfaced, now tinged with the reality of the photo and the third-person comment that had been thrown into the space between. The comment, idle, careless, but somehow precise, had pierced through the fog of routine. "She's not the same," it had said, or something along those lines, echoing a sentiment you hadn't allowed yourself to confront. The weight of those words nudged you toward a realization. The love you've been holding inside has been whispering all this time, patient, waiting for a moment like this to be heard. It isn't a sudden revelation. It's a slow dawning, like the sun lifting after a night of clouds. You found yourself typing again, this time refusing to delete the draft. The first line formed quietly. "I saw the photo and an old feeling rose up." The next line hesitated, then continued. "I've been carrying something that I've never said, and I think it might be time to let it breathe." The words felt heavier than the coffee steam, but also lighter, like a balloon finally released after being tied down for too long. Your thumb hovered over the send button, caught between the fear of unsettling the fragile balance you both have built, and the yearning to speak truth that has lived in the margins of every shared glance. If you've felt this shift too, you already understand the delicate dance of silence and confession. The urge to press send isn't just about dictating a future. It's an invitation for both of you to stand a little closer to the truths you have already known in the space between. You can almost hear the soft soundtrack of your past, those gentle guitar chords from the cafe where you first met, the rustle of pages as you both read in the same corner of the library, playing in the background of this decision. There's a quiet sense of timing now, not the ticking of clocks, but a feeling that the universe is handing you a moment to choose. Not a divine proclamation, but a subtle nudge that the air has thinned just enough for you to hear your own heartbeat, louder than the noise of everyday life. It feels as if everything has been aligning itself, not in grand gestures, but in these small pauses where you can finally hear the words you once kept in the back of your mind. It's a feeling that, if you're attuned, feels like a gentle tide pulling you toward shore, not a wave that crashes. Stay with this, because what happens next isn't loud. It's a quiet turning point that matters more than any shouted confession ever could. As you sit there, the phone screen glowing soft blue, you notice that the kitchen clock's ticking has become a metronome for your thoughts. The realization that you've loved them quietly, all along, starts to settle into a shape you can finally see. It's not a dramatic epiphany, more a gentle unfolding, like a flower pushing through the soil, coaxed by the warmth of sunlight you had previously ignored. Your mind drifts back to that moment at the park, the way the water reflected the moon, and you realize that the love you've held in your chest has always been reflected there too. You recall the way their fingers brushed yours accidentally, the second you both reached for the same driftwood, and how your hearts seemed to synchronize in that brief, unspoken contact. Those fragments now glue together, forming a quietly coherent picture. The love that never needed a grand announcement because it lived in the subtlety of shared silences. Perhaps I'm waiting for the perfect line, you think, but maybe the perfect line is just honesty. The draft begins to feel less like a script and more like a bridge, an invitation to walk together across something you both have been tiptoeing around. You remember a verse that once comforted you in a similar quiet moment. Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am." It isn't an invocation for miracles, merely a reminder that stillness allows truth to surface. You let that stillness settle into your chest, easing the knot that has been tightening since the photo surfaced. You glance at the window once more, noticing how the light now paints gentle gold across the table where your coffee sits. The world outside seems to be holding its breath, waiting for you to make the next move. You feel a soft surge of gratitude for the unspoken love that has sustained you, for the way it has taught you patience, for the way it has shown you how deep a quiet heart can be. It's not a climax, it's a gentle tide pulling you toward a shore you've always known was there. And the thing that's finally surfacing now is a feeling you can no longer tuck away, a quiet acknowledgement that the love you've held in the shadows is ready to step into the light, not with fireworks, but with a calm, steady glow that promises something real, something worth the gentle risk of being seen.